if Jeff Bezos were starting Amazon today, he wouldn't develop a retailer that sells everything to everybody. He would start with books. If Zuckerberg were starting a social network today, he would start with college students, not everyone, right? But for whatever reason, so many founders, and maybe it's the pressure of how much money they're raising, the size of the A rounds are creating this level of pressure that you have to go after this enormous TAM.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Ground Up. Another fantastic guest. I've actually been wanting to interview this guy for a couple of months now. He showed up on my social media a few months ago talking about things that were just really interesting, and he piqued my interest around curiosity. We'll get all the way into how that story went and kind of what he's doing, because I think you guys are going to love the story here. Before we get too deep into that, Dave, how you doing today?
I'm doing great. Happy Wednesday, right? Or is it what? No, it's Thursday, right?
It's Thursday, brother. Come on, man.
Well, fast start.
This week is going. I feel you. I had a week just like that last week. Actually, me and my neighbor, we get up every morning, 6:30. We go to the gym. We hit it pretty hard. And he and I were talking to each other like it was Thursday, and it was Wednesday last week. And he literally got into his car that morning with his suit on, ready to go do a sales presentation he had to do Thursday night, and didn't realize until about 11 o'clock that it was actually only Wednesday. So I feel your pain there. Yeah, exactly. Dave, just to kind of give the audience and lay the groundwork for the audience in regards to the story I just mentioned. A couple of months ago, I'm digging deep in LinkedIn. I see this guy, Dave Rubinstein, on my LinkedIn just talking about founders. And he's just in a lot of chats, and those chats are really kind of speaking to me. I'm commenting on them. You and I are getting in some back and forth conversation. And then all of a sudden I see this 100 founders thing, and I'm asking you, what is this? And so if you can, tell me, what exactly is that? What exactly were you doing that caught my attention?
All right. So if we go back a few months, I was planning on taking the summer off. I was going to play a bunch of golf. I was going to travel. I was going to live my best life and figure out what I want to be when I grow up in the fall. Like, that was the plan.
Right.
What I learned really quickly is I'm not good at doing nothing. I'm not good at not having a goal. Like, I got too anxious. I need to be doing something. I need to be learning. I need to be interacting with people. But I didn't want a boss. So one day I just went on LinkedIn and I posted, I'm going to meet 30 founders in the next 30 days. And it was nothing more than a way of kind of staying busy and learning and networking and meeting people. Well, what ended up happening, I didn't see coming. So what ended up happening was, before founders would take a meeting with me, they'd do their homework. And so they'd come to the call and they'd say, hey, I noticed you worked at Salesforce. I noticed you worked at Outreach. Can I pick your brain on go-to-market? Or you're talking to 30 founders, like, what are you seeing? What are you learning? And at the end of every call, they had asked me way more questions than I had asked them. And they'd say, hey, this has been awesome talking to you about this stuff. Can we meet again? And I'm thinking, sure, I don't have a job. I've got nothing but time. Sure, let's talk again. And then after that conversation, they'd say, you know what? I've got some friends that have started businesses that would get a ton of value out of talking to you. Can I make an introduction? So I said, sure. And then I'm talking to these friends, and next thing I know, these friends are posting on LinkedIn. I had this conversation with Dave Rubinstein. We talked about my business. It was awesome. You should talk to him too. Now, all of a sudden, it's not just me talking to other founders in New York and California. All of a sudden, it's other parts of the country. Now it's a founder in Germany. Now it's a founder in Australia. Now it's a founder in South America or in Africa. And all of a sudden, this starts to spread really fast. And then founders started to say to me, hey, this is really interesting. Are you documenting your journey anywhere? And I thought, well, I record every call, so I sure can. So I stood up a Substack and just started cranking out insights between my Substack and my LinkedIn. And more founders started following, and more founders started reaching out saying, I'd love to have a conversation with you. And the more conversations I have, the more I learn. The more I learn, the better my insights, the more people want to meet with me. And we've created this flywheel. Fast forward to today, I've met with 220 founders across 6 continents and 31 different countries. So that's a little bit about my journey and how we got here.
Perfect. So I'm going to take a couple steps back and we're going to retrace a little bit of that story. So you were in that unemployed thing. You were looking to play some golf. By the way, what's your best round you ever shot?
I don't even know. So that tells you how good I am.
So you weren't good enough to focus on golf every day. I get that part. I've luckily gotten this past year, I've gotten on the course almost every other week. I'll carve out 5 hours to get out there on some Thursdays. Obviously didn't make it out there today, but I've made it out there pretty consistently. So you were looking for that. You were not looking for that next thing. You were in between things and you said, I want to talk to 30 founders in the next 30 days. First off, how did you come to the conclusion that the person you wanted to talk to for this discovery process in your life, in your career, in your business, how did you establish founders were the people you wanted to talk to?
Well, I thought if I were going to go back into the workforce, I was likely going to work for a startup and I was likely going to be reporting into a founder. So getting a little visibility into what types of founders would I work best with? What types of technologies do I think are best set up for success? So I was doing this, largely with the intention of kind of having a more strategic approach come the fall and figuring out what sectors do I think are best positioned to be successful, all those things. And I also believe firmly that no matter how good your experience is in the past, it's in the past. The playing field has never been more level for going out and finding a job. And people care less about what you've done in the past. They care more about what your potential is for the future. And so I realized that with every day that goes by, as good as the experience I had at Salesforce and Outreach and other places, the teams that people run today are not as big as they used to because you don't need as many people. You're managing technology and tech stack and agents, which you never had to do before. So the job that everyone is doing effectively as a head of sales, and for most jobs, is radically different and will continue to look more and more different every single day. And so I felt like I had to prove to the world, if and when I wanted to go back out there, that I'm equipped to do where the world is going, not where it's been. And these conversations were going to be my roadmap.
In the first, let's say 10 to 15 of these meetings you had, Dave, where did you self-identify maybe your biggest gap in your own kind of experience as you were potentially looking to go there? What was the biggest gap you found within yourself? And then we'll get to maybe some of the common gaps you saw in some of the founders in their business. But starting for you, where was your biggest gap?
Yeah, I mean, I think my gap in approaching this was maybe how I thought about looking at companies. Right. And so I was looking, in the past, and this was, a mistake that I had made recently, but I was looking at the company and what does the company do and how well is the company positioned for success. And I didn't always pay as much attention to the founder. And that's really the key. The technology can be great, but you gotta believe in the person that's steering the ship, and your ethos have to be the same. And you have to agree with their vision. So talking with lots and lots of founders, one of the things that I realized really quickly is I do best and I can add the most value with founders who come from a technical background, right? And so of the founders that I've talked to so far, probably 80% plus are non-sales. When you work for a founder who has a sales background and you're a sales guy, you're often the executor. Right, you're the one that executes someone else's go-to-market vision, and you've always got somebody who may be second guessing your approach. If you're going to a business where the founder has no experience in sales, they're turning over the keys, and they're saying, "This is an area that I trust you." And if you have a founder that fits in the middle there, maybe they have some marketing experience, whatever, that's a little gray because they often feel like they know enough to guide you in terms of what sales should be. So I realized that was a gap in my thinking and in my approach, and understanding what types of founders I work best with, what their backgrounds are, was a really big realization.
I think it makes total sense. I mean, I come with a similar background, and I, over the past 3 years, have helped quite a few companies kind of help get their production higher. And the ones that I've worked the best with, the ones I've been able to help the most, to your point, are the ones that are the developer, the technical person, the guy who knows how to build a software, but he doesn't necessarily know how to manage a sales process or manage a sales team, or even how to hire a salesperson, much less train them. There's a lot of those missing pieces and parts that they've just never had to do. And in my current business right now, I found myself as a founder doing a similar issue, but on the other side of the spectrum. I started bringing in some developers. I don't know how to hire developers. I don't know how to manage developers. I don't even know really how to communicate effectively to developers, because I know how to speak to salespeople. That's just what I've done in my whole career. And so I had a huge gap in that regard. So I had to bring in help within my business around the people who had that technical knowledge that I did not have. So I can see that you, as a guy with a sales background, where you're going to help the most is those non-sales minded founders, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And it's something that when I talk to other folks that are looking for roles in various fields, very rarely do I hear someone say, I'm being intentional about the background of the founder. And is because that has a lot to do with the strengths of the company and the way the company is run. And it really is, the more founders I talk to, the more it's clear the direction and the culture is set from the founder and the founder's background. And understanding that before tells you a lot about a company.
Yeah, I would agree with you on that premise. And I would say that what it sounds to me like, and what I would take from this is attribute number one is making sure you've got alignment of value that you can offer to that founder. If you are looking to go as another person in an executive decision-making process, is can I supplement that founder, not add on to their strengths? And that's what we talked about. You finding technical founders, you supplying a thing that they currently don't know how to do or is not a strength. Number two, I think so often people do focus on the product in which that company has, or that reputation of the product. But I think that, to your point, is we all follow the leader. And if that leader is not embody everything you need it to embody, no matter how great the product is, that company will likely never reach the limits of where it is. I would rather, in my 15 years of running sales organizations, much rather work for a strong leader with a subpar product today than to work for a fantastic product and a subpar leader. And that's kind of what it sounds like you're saying you'll also add as maybe a second tier focus of when you're talking to a founder. Is it a leader that will be able to drive that shit forward, not just have a great product, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think today, more so than ever before, products get built faster than they've ever been. So you could have a great product today, and if you're not continuing to move along that trajectory, 3 months, 6 months from now, somebody passes you. So it's not so much about the product that you have today. To me, one of the most important things is being crystal clear about the ICP that you're going after. I talk to a lot of founders today who are like, we're going to sell, go-to-market tech to everybody. And, our ICP is SMB and enterprise for go-to-market tech companies. Just this enormous TAM.
Yeah.
And, an enormous TAM worked when you had fewer competitors. But when the volume of startups that are launching today, everybody's going after the biggest TAMs. If Jeff Bezos were starting Amazon today, he wouldn't develop a retailer that sells everything to everybody. He would start with books. If Zuckerberg were starting a social network today, he would start with college students, not everyone, right? But for whatever reason, so many founders, and maybe it's the pressure of how much money they're raising, the size of the A rounds are creating this level of pressure that you have to go after this enormous TAM. But the idea is that the companies that I see that are best positioned to succeed are more narrow in their niche, and they're gonna kill
Specialization.
right? They're gonna be really, so those are things that I think are really, really important.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, you see those companies that they go so broad with, and I made that mistake too when I started my business. I was like, I'm going to do coaching and consulting for every business in the world that would ever need a sales coach, or like so broad. But my background, in over 10 years, I come from the automotive background. I've got a reputation in the automotive space of building some of the largest automotive software companies and advertising companies in automotive. Why shy away from that when there are dozens, if not hundreds, of new automotive vendors coming in the market every single month? Stay in that place. And that's where I've kind of shifted back to over time, which is I have an area that I know how to perform. I know how to do it. I've got a reputation. Stop trying to conquer the world with your process. Dominate an area, and there's plenty to go around.
Yeah, I think one example of I've seen of that recently is, when I think about go-to-market tech, there are a lot of companies that are launching right now call recorders, like varying flavors of call recorders to compete with Gong. And it's a very competitive market. One company I met with, and I'm not going to kind of name them by name, but that jumped out at me was they said, we're going to go into this space, but we're going to focus only on regulated industries, right? Like, so we're going to build out this solution that's designed for regulated industries. So we'll sell it to pharma and financial services. And so it's a whole different set of features that go on what's becoming a largely commoditized product. It's the kind of thing that you have to be really intentional about. It's the kind of feature that people won't just copy because it's a strategic decision. So it's not an add-on feature. It shrinks the market, but there are way fewer people that are competing in that space, right? And so the companies that I'm seeing are verticalizing, are getting way more specific, and they're killing it.
Yeah, and it shrinks the market in idea, but it increases the specialization, and that gives you more of a demand in that regards. I mean, in the automotive space, there are really only like 4 primary CRMs that any of those automotive, just over 18,000 car dealerships, and they use one of 4 CRMs. There's an opportunity for you to create a dynamic CRM and come in and compete in that space. But nobody's trying to compete with Salesforce in there because no car dealerships use Salesforce. As big and bad as Salesforce is, they're not in the automotive dealership side of the business. Now, let me ask you this question, kind of just to change directions a little bit. When you made that decision to get and to do the 30, how did you get in front of 30 founders in that days? Like, was it just LinkedIn outreach? Was it, professional network? How did you accomplish the goal of 30 founders in 30 days? That's not a small task to get 30 people to willing to talk to you.
It happened faster than I thought, right? So it was 100% LinkedIn. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. So it was a combination of people engaging with my posts and me identifying people and engaging with theirs. And it was really that simple. I think I had a headline on my profile that resonated people. I optimized my LinkedIn profile for curiosity. So, people would be curious and would root for me. And I got to the point where I even had some founders reach out to me and say, hey, I'd love to help you with your goal. Happy to meet.
I can imagine once you get the traction going, it became easier. But that first couple of meetings, were they the hardest ones to get, just to kind of figure out kind of the angle and the direction you wanted to get? And then kind of to the point, once you had it going, it was almost like, talk to this guy, talk to that guy. You should do this. This guy comes inbound message. I talked to Johnny. He said, talk to you. Is that kind of how it went overall?
Yeah, it was. I mean, the first few weren't that hard. I would say I was not vetting as hard as I could or do now. Okay. I was meeting with someone's got a services business or another type of business that may not be in my wheelhouse because I typically focus on tech, but I was meeting with them and I wanted to kind of learn and hear their story. And, everyone who I met with was then starting to refer. So to your point, it just started to snowball once I met with the first few.
So we started with 30. We then evolved it to 100. Like when I met you, it was 100. Now it's 220. What happens next? What's the next step?
Yeah, it's weird because I always need a goal, right? So I evolved. I used to have my headline on LinkedIn was my mission is to meet 100 founders in 100 days, and we hit that, and then it's passed, and then I said I'm going to do 100 founders every quarter. And I've now done 100 in Q3 and 100 in Q4. Now I think the new goal that's out there, I'm like, I gotta stretch bigger. I'd like to meet 100 founders in 100 countries. And so that one's gonna take me. I think that one's gonna take me a little bit of time.
You said you're at how many countries now? You said 42, right?
31.
31. So when you originally started this, it was fact finding, it was learning, it was education, right? And then it became, man, I can learn a lot and then I can give back to community. I can start sharing with them on my Substack, my overall findings. Do you find that the primary audience of your Substack are other founders who need help? Is that kind of the primary audience, or is it people who want to work with founders like you anticipated your next role would be? What is the primary audience of that?
Yeah, so what's interesting is it started with founders, right? And so the majority of my Substack, there are hundreds of founders who are following that. I think there are probably thousands that are following me on LinkedIn. So it's a very specific group that are following me in both places. What's happening now is there's a new wave of people that are starting to come in, which are people that are interested in the founders, right? And so there are all sorts of different types of vendors that have different software and different services that are designed for founders. So those folks are reaching out. I'm starting to have the first few VCs reaching out and saying, hey, what are you seeing? What's out there? Are there any interesting companies? I'm having recruiters are coming out and saying, hey, which which companies are hot, which companies are likely to raise and going to need recruiting support. Like, so it's almost like if you put the founder in the middle of the ecosystem, it's like, who are all the other people that have an interest in this founder? And that's the second wave of people that are starting to reach out to me.
So it sounds like there's a lot of different avenues from a financial perspective you can ultimately take this process. And without you going into the details of what your plan is or how somebody could do this, have you figured out ultimately what you anticipate the way you will use this to eventually monetize it? Is it that I go work with one of these founders? Is it that I go work with a lot of these founders? Do you see a VC route being more the direction, recruiting? I mean, like, with all these different people coming at you from different angles, there's probably a lot of different angles. Probably can't do them all. Have you identified kind of where you think you'll ultimately make this make sense for you?
Yeah, it's a great question. I've been incorporated as a business, I think less than 3 months. So I'm still very, very early on. I think my general thesis is I want to add as much value as I can and connect and develop relationships with as many people as I can, because those are two things that AI can't replace. So I'm getting the relationships, I'm recording every call, so I'm getting data, which turns into insights. So that becomes my asset or my moat. And where it goes, I'm still open. I think there's a bunch, to your point, I think there's a bunch of different directions. I think meeting certain people makes it really clear. I meet with some companies, I'm like, wow, I could sell that product, or I'd get excited about selling that. I meet with others and I think, wow, they could benefit really significantly from this other company that I've met with. Let me make an introduction. I'm still figuring out the monetization, but I'm having fun, and people still want to keep meeting. So I'm going to keep doing it.
Just love it. So prior to you going down this route, you mentioned you had worked in primarily a sales background, and you had mentioned obviously some impressive names of companies you did. What was your kind of specialization of role in the corporate world before you left?
Yeah, so I was a go-to-market leader for a lot of years. So for me, it was all about kind of execution and scale. I did a startup. We went from 0 to 10. So that was a really interesting journey, kind of being head of sales / first sales guy, figuring out the product, selling into an enterprise before the product existed, and then, going through the delivery and then scaling that business. So that was an experience that was really interesting for me. I worked for a small publicly traded company that the CRO and all my peer group ended up getting let go because there was some financial challenges. And one day a board member calls me up and says, "Hey, DR, we had to let go the whole team except for you. We need you to keep the ship afloat." And we were able to sell the business to Blackstone. So that was like a great outcome. Salesforce, spending 6 years there, you really learn how to lead when you give people monthly quotas. Because if you're giving someone a monthly quota, you got to win hearts and minds. You can't be all stick and no carrot. And finding that mix to make people want to fight for you. I learned that at Salesforce, and then going to outreach and taking a region and going from 1 million up to 25 million over a few years and scaling the team was a really fun time. So I've had the opportunity to do a lot of cool stuff.
So let's say you meet with one of these founders and they've got a really exciting software company. They've got a really great product, a service and solution, and they don't know how to do a sales. And they said, "Dave, if you had to consult with me on how to build a sales team in today's landscape that leverages all the technology to our advantage and the benefit of the people, what would be your prescription to a question like that with a startup, without a sales team? How would you set up a team like that?" I'm very interested in that because I've got a certain way I set up sales teams for organizations I work with, which tends to be not the way a lot of companies do it. And I love to see kind of like with somebody with your background who's in bigger business opportunity background, how would you say is the best way to set it up today?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I'd say is however long you think it's going to take you to be ready to bring on your first salesperson, I think it should be longer. And I think you should wait longer, because many founders, particularly those that don't come from sales backgrounds, are really are often rushing to hand off the keys to go to market. And if you don't do it after a lot of the basics are in place, you're setting that seller up for failure. I have a framework that I've developed as a result of having these 200 plus conversations. I think if you look at the Medic and MedPick and BANT and all the different sales methodologies that we've all kind of seen over the last 20 years, we haven't seen a new one in a long time. Yet the way that we sell is radically different than it's ever been before. And we've never been in a world where instead of having 2 primary competitors, you have 20, right? That are out there that legitimately could do what you do, or could at least say they do what you do, which is enough to create confusion in the marketplace, right? And so I've developed my own framework that I coach founders on. It's SPRINT is the acronym, and SPRINT stands for speed, problem, results, implementation, niche, and trust, right? And so when I work with founders and help them build out their go-to-market strategy, we start with a sprint audit of how they're performing in those 6 areas. And that gives us a roadmap of where we take the business.
Love it. So you got a systematic way that you'll inspect what and how they currently do it. You'll prescribe a solution based off of where their gaps are or what their strong are now. Do you believe that a sales team early in the business should be built like, let's say they've already got a couple of pieces there. Let's say they've got a really, really strong piece and a couple of not so strong pieces. Should that founder build around the strong piece or build around a system regardless of the pieces?
So can you give me a tangible example we can play it through?
Yeah, let's say you've got a just any type of software solution that you're offering to the market. And it's a great solution. You've got a guy that you would consider an A player in your business. He is an A player, absolutely. And then you've got a couple other C players out there. That A player doesn't necessarily, maybe let's say that A player is a closer, but you believe the best sales process is a full service sales cycle. And maybe you don't. Maybe you believe that there's SDRs, discoveries, closers, sales engineers. I mean, you could break down sales organizations in that way. But let's say that person that is your A player is only a closer. They're not good at the discovery. They're not good at the SDR. They're just not going to cold call, but they're a closer. In that scenario, should this business owner, in your opinion, build around that A player, or should they establish what they believe is the best process regardless of their players and have their A player conform to their process? What's more important, the player or the process?
Well, I think the process is how you scale. That's an easy answer to give. I think the reality is that everybody's looking at their runway, going, how many new customers can I get, and how can I extend the runway so I don't have to raise capital as soon? It's not an absolute answer. I think the idea is that if you have someone who's performing well and they're not breaking the business, any leader is hard pressed to make changes as long as what that person is doing is not detrimental to the business. They're not bringing in bad business. They're not promoting kind of toxic behavior. If they're having some success but not following the process, like sometimes you're willing to deal with that, particularly early on in a business when you have something that's working. But that shouldn't become the norm. And you need to create something that's scalable. And so an example of sprint and how it would come into play is, N is niche. So, what's really important in the early days is who are you selling to? Like really being crystal clear on like, yes, I get it. You'll have some deals that come in that don't fit your ideal ICP, and you're probably going to try to close them. But how hard do you run at them? And how do you make sure that from a marketing effort and from your outbound effort, you are laser focused on going after the accounts that you have the best chance to win and are also your best chance to be successful on delivery?
I asked that question because I've worked with some clients. I've asked that question because I've worked with some clients that I would say have probably made that mistake that I just spoke about probably too frequently. And they would have a guy that was incredibly talented who would close deals. but they can never duplicate how he did it. And that then in turn created bad habits for everybody else, because then they all wanted to try to follow that model of that person who had an individual talent, but it wasn't duplicatable. And I think that when I got them to understand that sometimes your best person can be the thing holding your business back the most, and to actually build and establish a process, recruit, train, and develop based off that process, we're able to see that team go substantially further. And even though we had to take a couple of steps back in regards to the immediate sales that one talented individual could do, they were never able to scale, to your point, when you depended so heavily on a person who had individual talent, not the ability to conform to what was best for the business. So I think a lot of small businesses make that mistake. They make that mistake of they have a talented guy who they don't know how to hold accountable. So then they never hold them accountable. And then it makes it almost impossible to hold anybody else accountable in the same time in the future. Have you seen that as well?
Yeah, I think the way I'd say it is there are two different types of salespeople. There are magicians and there are soldiers, right? And so you build a sustainable business with soldiers who follow a process. But it's okay to have a few magicians mixed in there. The challenge is you don't want to have the soldiers trying to copy the magicians because they can't do it. One of the biggest problems that you see is, in many cases, I would classify a founder who's doing kind of founder-led sales as that magician, right? Like they are closing deals as the hero. Sheer force of personality and will and existing relationships, like they're getting things done. That creates a false sense of we have product market fit. We have a process. You don't have a process. You have a founder who is jamming this down, high likelihood to close deals and getting them in. And that's one of the things that gets companies into trouble, is when you start to think that you have product market fit because a founder through force of personality is closing deals. And then what they end up doing is they hire a salesperson, and the founder can't translate what they were doing to someone who doesn't have a founder title and a founder story and a founder personality. You can't translate that. And that first sales hire is set up to fail.
Yeah, I find it's funny you come to it through that angle, because I don't disagree with your angle at all. I've always assessed it slightly different. And what I've found is in those environments with that type of ICP that you've seen, that you've looked for, that technical background, I've found sometimes founders will sell because of that title, right? That title is valuable when they're the builder of the technology, the founder, the CEO. That's a valuable asset. They'll get more meetings, and people will hear it because they're hearing it from the person who built it. But I also generally hear when those are technical people is they have a lot of difficulty simplifying the communication of the product to the audience. And it depends on who the audience is, but a lot of times they oversell, they overtalk. They're like so excited about their product like it's their child that they go right into the product and they don't waste any time doing any discovery. They don't actually sell with a solution. They're not offering a consultation based off of the problems there. They're just showing off their shiny object. And that's where I've found, for me, the most success is when I get the founder off selling. I still leverage the title in the presence of the founder, but I align them with an actual skilled seller. And I have the founder be the sales engineer who only speaks when they need to speak in a technical capacity, but they're not driving the relationship and driving the conversation and driving the follow-up. And that's kind of, for me, when I consult with that founder who's the one doing the seller, who comes from a technical background, as I say, let's not even worry about hiring this amazing closer. Let's hire a relationship-focused SDR type who can handle relationships and appointment setting and follow-ups. And if you do that and you let them run calls where you jump in to do technical, the marriage of those two skill sets will garner the best results. Have you ever tried something like that?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. You're spot on that the founders who are technical in nature get so hung up in features, and rarely do they realize that like showing that extra couple features is never the difference between someone buying and not buying. I think one question I always ask technical founders when they give me their pitch is, okay, so let's pretend you just gave me your pitch and now I run into my CEO in the hallway and he says, "Oh, I understand you just met with this company. What do they do? What do you think my takeaway is from our conversation?" And in many cases, that technical founder goes into a very detailed description of what just happened. But rarely can they give that concise, I want you to take away these 3 things. And one of the fundamental differences I notice between founders with a sales background and founders that don't is founders with a sales background, when they're doing a call with me and they're doing a demo or showing me what they have, they always start off ground me in slides. So they show a slide that frames the problem. And they show a slide that says, I'm going to show you these 3 things. And then they dive in and they come back to the slides and they say, hey, I just showed you these 3 things. And when I work with a technical founder, they go right in, they demo right up until we're out of time. And then, there's no time for next steps or anything.
Feature dump. Just feature dump, go for it. Yeah, it's interesting. So I'd be interested to ask, because I asked this question a very specific way. You meet with the founder in the first 10 minutes and you say, Johnny, I would love to know more about your company. What do you do? First off, how do you ask that question? Is there a specific way you ask it to get a response that you're looking for? And based off of how you ask it, without the details, what do you generally hear in the response to that? And maybe it's a different answer for a technical founder versus a sales-focused founder, but what do you generally hear? Because I've got a pretty strong opinion on how I ask that question and what I commonly hear, which gives me a lot of insight in regards to what I do next.
Yeah, I mean, I try to do every call with a founder the same way, but I try to make it open-ended. I don't like to lead the witness. So it's really like, I'd like to learn a little bit about you, and I'd love to hear about your company. And then and if you want to show me a demo, you can. After that, we can go in any direction you want. My only goal is that when you get off the phone, you say, wow, that was 30 minutes well spent. And okay,
so when you ask that and you frame it, what do you do? On average, what do you generally hear? As in, how long of an answer is that answer?
It could be minutes, not seconds. And again, it gets into the sausage making and the details of what and how and rarely is it. And occasionally they'll mention the problem, but the problem is so surface level. None of it is how the industry is changing and how this problem is getting worse. It's just like, we help people who have a pipeline problem. Everyone's trying to get more pipeline. It's really, really high level. One question when we get through the initial part that I always ask founders is, what's holding you back? Like whether they're killing it or not. And it throws people off for a loop because you do get some founders who are flexing a little bit on the call and they're talking about how they're killing it. And I'd say, why aren't you growing faster? What's holding you back? And it's interesting because I would say about half the founders own what's holding them back, and it's their fault, and it's something that they have a gap that they're working on. And about another half don't, and another half make it about industry related things or capital constraints or other things of which they have no control over. So that's always an interesting finding.
Yeah, so the way I ask it, Dave, is I specifically say, I want to know more about what your business does. Now, the challenge I have for you is I want you to explain to me with the most value you can in under 15 words. Can you tell me what you guys do? And that is such a challenge for somebody because they've never thought about being able to effectively deliver their value in less than 20 seconds.
Right.
And I think as a salesperson, you have to always be able to do that. As a cold caller, as a person who teaches and trains SDRs across multiple industries, what people will do when you call them is, what do you do? If you don't know how to make that statement as impactful as possible in under 20 seconds, you don't know how to provide a value prop for your business. And so often founders don't have that skill. Now, if I'm talking to a sales-focused founder, those at a much higher rate know how to answer that question and know how to provide value consolidated in that aspect. And I would say, Dave, the way I ask questions as well definitely changes the way I get answers. And you know this, but for our audience, I'll give you an example. 10 years ago, I used to sell websites, and they used to do this thing what's called geofencing offers. And so that means, like, if I'm in a specific area, I would see a specific message based off the area I'm in. So if I'm, let's say, on the campus of University of Texas, the client whose website could deliver a message specifically to people that are on that campus, as in all students get an extra discount. But you only see it when you're on there. And so I would ask customers in my demo, I'd say, hey, let me ask you, do you know what geofencing is? What percentage of people answered yes to that, Dave? Guess.
10%.
95% said yes.
Wow.
Okay. I changed the question. Okay, same question, phrase it differently. No, Dave, most people I talk to have heard of geofencing, but don't understand what it means. Now, let me ask you, do you understand what geofencing is?
Yeah, not really.
10% yes.
Yeah.
Complete inverse answer, because I gave them permission to admit ignorance. And the same thing I would say if I'm asking that question of that founder is I would always take the conversation negative. Almost every client I talk to, almost every founder I talk to has a ton of things that they struggle with. What do you think you're doing best? So I always lay the groundwork for negative, take it positive, then say, now, if there's one thing you could fix, I'm sure there's a lot. Almost every founder has a lot of things they want to fix, but if there's one thing you're focusing on fixing, what would it be? That would be the way I would position that to get them to be willing to do it. Saying every founder has faults, every founder has issues, because to your point, a lot of times when they're talking to you, they're in promotion mode, right? They're like, I want to tell you how great I am, not how willing or how poor I'm doing or where I need help. That would be how I would ask that question, in that sense. But it's interesting. So when you ask that question, though, the way you do it, is it hard for people to give you negatives, or is it just as hard for them to admit it?
No, I'm getting admission and negative.
Okay,
I think part of the reason a number of folks have asked me, hey, are you going to do your own podcast and have these on pod? And part of the reason why I say I don't have any plan right now is because if the calls were public, and then the honesty would be different, right? Like
correct.
I've created what I hope is a safe space where
Right.
I'm not going to invest in these companies. I'm not going to buy their products. I'm just a guy trying to learn and share the learnings with others. And so with that, I'm really not threatening, and there's no reason for people not to give me anything other than what's real.
It's so true. To me, Dave, not that you're in a position where you're selling these guys, but that's exactly how I teach sales. I teach sales that if you're doing a discovery correctly, you never have the customer feel like they're being sold. They never feel like the questions that are being asked will then be used against them later. But that's exactly how I teach somebody how to do sales, which is a basis around a sales discovery and that premise as well. So Dave, I know that before we hit the record button, you said you just recently did come up with an offer. Now, I'm not asking you to tell me what your offer is, but I would love to know the process around this how long has it been since you started this process?
I started talking to people about 5 months ago. I decided to have a company about 3 months ago.
Awesome. So in that journey, it took you 5 months to start it, 3 months to make a company. You have something going here. And now you're like, okay, I have a solution to offer people at this point. How did you come to that conclusion? Because I think that one of the biggest challenges companies have is, how do I make my offer attractive to its audience? So without giving details of what your offer is, I'd love to understand how you came to the conclusion of what to make within your offer and what you're trying to solve for.
Yeah, I think over each conversation, understanding of my ICP and the problem that I can solve got sharper and sharper, right? So when I first started off, I wanted to talk to founders. And then over time, it became founders that were and then over time, it became, you know what? I want them to have a little bit of traction, but not have blown up yet. So I'm like, all right, okay, to 10 million. And then as I talked to more, I started to realize, you know what? The places where I can add the most value are founders that tend to be more technical in nature. So over this journey, my ICP became sharper and sharper and sharper. And I started to realize once I got to the point of where I felt like I could add value, and it became really clear that founder-led sales is an area where there is a gap, where it is critical to the success of the business. And the majority of founders who are doing it have received no formal training. They are figuring it out on the fly, and they are burning cycles that they don't have time to burn. So the problem is only getting worse. So that's kind of how I got to that problem. And in all of the conversations I had, I started to see the founders that were being successful. And based on the success points that I saw, I came up with that sprint framework of, these are the 6 things that I think will make people successful. And so I thought, okay, I've identified my ICP. I've identified a framework that can make people within my ICP successful. It would be, the next logical step would be, how do I make sure that people are following this framework in order to be successful? And that's really what the offer is about, is kind of a next step where I'm going deep with founders to make sure that they're following the steps and they're on the path to move their way through founder-led sales.
So it sounds like this will be a consulting-based offer where you are going to be in there going through your framework, providing solution-based opportunities, coaching on how to execute those, in development on that. Now, Dave, if I'm accurate there, is there a way to then scale that to where it's not specifically and exclusively you doing it? Do you see yourself being able to build a business, a team, a framework that can go past you? Because what I see in the coaching business, and I talk to a lot of coaches, a lot of consultants, the biggest issue with an individual talent like you is that it's hard to scale past you because you only have but so many hours a day. You can only take on but so many clients. Is there an opportunity or even an interest for you to make it a full agency-based program off the framework, or is it primarily going to be a Dave project and they're investing into you more than the framework?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think, one of the things that will end up happening is, and anytime you launch something, it never plays out exactly as you thought,
course.
right?
Correct.
So I will learn a ton going through this process, and I will have to iterate a bunch of times, and I'll have things that I thought would be amazing that will flop, and I will have things that I thought were add-ons that people got excited about. So I think the beginning is defining it and getting it working and making sure that customers love it. I think once you have that, it becomes much easier in today's world to start to think about how do I automate? And how does AI come in? Because one of the biggest mistakes that people make with AI today is they try to find solutions for it. They're like, I want to get AI into this and this, but they don't actually build out the process the way that they want it before they bring in. Like, AI doesn't work magic. It makes things that you've already figured out, it operationalizes them. It can make them work better, but it doesn't figure it out for you. So I'm in the figure it out stage. I think once I've figured it out, I'll start to go, okay, how can I operationalize this? So instead of taking X hours of my time, it takes, 0.1X of my time to do. And what are the things that we can do? We may see down the road, we may see a DR GPT. Who knows? Because I've got
Nice.
all of the transcripts and all the learnings from this, and so there's opportunities there. So short answers, I don't know, but I'm looking at it because I realize that I don't scale.
What final words, other than going to your Substack and reading, other than getting onto your LinkedIn and engaging with your content, other than if you're a founder and you want a chance to speak with Dave and meet with Dave and have him potentially go through the sprint framework with you, other than that, I know you also have a newsletter, right? Something like, is it a newsletter of some sort?
So that's part of the Substack. So that's just 100.
Anything else that anybody should know about you or what you're doing in your journey?
I think just know that I'm having a blast. And, if we have an opportunity to meet, my goal is always that's the best 30 minutes of your day, week, month, year. And you should come away with a smile and feeling a little bit inspired. We all have a lot on our plate. We all have a lot going on. Like, let's have some fun and let's make a difference for other people. That's really what I want people to take away.
Awesome. I love that. Love that message. If you don't think of it like work, it never is a job. That's one of the things I've loved about being an entrepreneur these past 3 years is I love getting up every single morning, getting at this desk and doing what I do every day. You got to pull me away from this office every single day. It's never work when you love what you're doing. And I appreciate that message, Dave. For all of you guys listening, like, comment, share, engage with the content. That's how I found Dave. Hopefully that's how you guys find Dave. Let's move forward with that message. Till next time, have a good one, guys.